I noticed that there appeared to be a bullet hole in the windshield on the driver's side, a couple of inches, over the hood of the car.
I have an extensive interview with Nick Principe. Bill Greer was his friend. I am quite aware that Bill Greer was at Bethesda that night, but there came a time when he arrived on West Executive Avenue. I went to greet Bill, and this is when he stated they sure had missed you guys today. What he had said to him, we missed you guys today. You should have been there. Shots were coming from everywhere. One came through the windshield and almost hit me. When I conversed with him a bit more, he related that bullets were coming from everywhere. One came through the windshield and almost got me. Based on this and my police curiosity, I went to the White House garage where I verified what he had related. I stand behind it, period. Signed, Nick. Very, very few people know, and I've not seen it, but Bill Greer wrote a manuscript that he wanted to write a book. And I do know the person that still has that manuscript and has been holding on for it for a number of years, and I don't know why he has never released it. But I have that person's name, and I've communicated with that person about Bill Greer. But it is this kind of evidence that gets ignored. The Secret Service had ordered 12 windshields from the Ford Motor Company right after the assassination. They said they wanted them for target practice. Why would they need replicas of the windshield from the Kennedy limousine in order to do target practice? Obviously there was something being done, and what I was think that was being done is that they were trying to recreate as closely as possible the damage that was done to the windshield that we see in the Alton's photograph, but that windshield was destroyed on November 25th, 1963. I became aware of a witness, George Whitaker. He was working at the Ford Motor Company. He told me that on November 25th, 1963, he saw the limousine in the B building in Dearborn, and that he was actually went behind a locked door where the windshield had been removed from the car, from the Kennedy limousine, which was sitting there, and he actually saw that windshield with a hole in the windshield, and based upon over 30 years of experience of working with glass, he saw that there had been a bullet hole through the front of that windshield. If it indicates a shot from the front, and if there are records that are mixed by the government, which we have here, then we have to ask, why did the government falsify the record, and why was there a cover-up? Why did the government cover it up? What is the value of these witnesses? 8 witnesses who saw a hole through the windshield. You had Stavis Ellis and H.R. Freeman from the Dallas Police Department, Evalia Glanges, who was a medical student at that time, Charles Taylor Jr. from the Secret Service. You had 2 reporters from the St. Louis Dispatch, Richard Dudman and Frank Cormier, and you had Nick Principe from the United States Park Police. George Whitaker, he was involved the night before on November 24th, 1963. They were deciding whether or not the plant was going to be open that Monday. Of course, Monday, November 25th, 1963, was the day of Kennedy's funeral. It was a national day of mourning, and virtually all the businesses in the United States were closed on that day. One notable exception was the Ford Motor Company. The Ford Motor Company only closed for a couple of hours on that Monday, but those couple of hours provided a perfect opportunity if the limousine was flown in, which I suspect on the evening of November 24th, to get that limousine out of Dearborn, Michigan on November 25th. Now, what is also interesting about those dates is we do have the White House garage logs. Curiously, the only day that somebody doesn't come in to see the limousine happens to be November 25th, 1963, which is the date that Mr. Whitaker indicated that he had seen the limousine in the B building at the Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan, at the Ford Motor Company. And when he got to work that day, he was in charge of all glass lamination, and he was ordered to report to the B building. And when he got there, they had a repair garage in that building, which some people have questioned. Why would there be a repair garage in what was an assembly plant? Well, in talking with a number of people that worked with the Ford Motor Company, not all the vehicles would come off the line perfectly. There may be something that didn't go exactly right during the factory assembly, and those repairs had to be done right there before the vehicle could leave the plant. And in that regard, they had set up a little area to do repairs on the vehicles, whatever may not have been performed correctly during the assembly process. And he went to where they had the glass lab. And he went to the door of the glass lab. He was in charge of glass lamination, and the door was locked. He knocked on the door, and two of his men were there. And what he had noticed before he went in there, that the Kennedy car did not have a windshield on it. And he went in there, and his two men that were working there, were told that they were to make a new windshield, and they were to use the old windshield as a template. And they made a new windshield. And I asked him, what did you do with the old windshield? He said he had studied the windshield. He had worked with glass for over 30 years. It had a bullet hole in it. He had been involved with his 30 years of working with glass with many tests on windshields, including bullets being fired through windshields. He immediately recognized what it was. And from the way the indentation was in the windshield, he knew that that bullet had transversed the windshield from the front to the inside of the windshield. And then I asked him, well, what did you do with the Kennedy windshield? He said, we scrapped it. I said, what? He said, yes, we scrapped it. We destroyed it. We were under orders to destroy the Kennedy windshield. I decided at that point, and this was really no investigative genius of mine, Len. It was a fluke circumstance. I happened to be talking to his son one day, and I believe, ironically enough, I believe I had David Lifton's Best Evidence book with me. And he said, oh, you're interested in the Kennedy assassination. He said, I remember my father, and this guy is an attorney and an ophthalmologist. He says, I remember my father, when I was young back in 1963, talking at the dinner table about an unusual experience he had with the Kennedy assassination. He said, it's been so many years, I can't remember everything about it, but if you would like to talk to him, I would try to set it up. And at first, the father, Mr. Whitaker, George Whitaker, was very willing to talk to me. And we finally set it up in August of 1993. And we set it up where there was a picnic at the home of his son. And while we were at the picnic, I could tell that his father, Mr. Whitaker, was very hesitant and reluctant to talk to me. And it was only with the encouragement of his son that he finally agreed to do so. And he became even more panicked when I brought out a tape recorder to record the conversation with him. But again, his son assured him, and he talked about and he related this account that I just gave you of what happened at the Ford Motor Plant on November 25, 1963. And he was very scared. And if you listen to that interview, you can hear his wife in the background saying, we've got to go. We've got family, you know. They were very fearful of what they were telling me. And I believe after that day that he was quite fearful of what he told me because he was not willing to talk further. When he died, his son found amongst his papers a testament that he had written to what had happened on that day, and he again recorded the events that he realized that he was not going to live forever and that he wanted to leave a written account of what he experienced on that day. And for me, it was just corroboration and verification of what he had told me that day. But as a lawyer, and with somewhat skepticism, to be honest, I didn't really understand the impact of it at that time. But the more I thought about it, I decided, and I changed a mode from being an interested researcher in the assassination to become an investigator. And I decided I was going to let the evidence lead me wherever it led me. If it could be corroborated, then I would accept it. If it could not be corroborated, then I would have to just give it whatever value I thought. As an attorney, corroboration is extremely important to me. I decided that I was going to try to talk to and contact as many people as I possibly could and actually speak with them, to interview them. And what I did is I went through the literature. I went through the reports. The first person I ever shared this with was Harold Weisberg. I actually went to Maryland and I spent a couple days with Harold Weisberg at his house. And I knew that he was a tough test. Harold Weisberg was very tough on researchers, very, very critical. He accepted my evidence. He thought that there was merit to what Mr. Whitaker was saying. Then I decided I was going to contact people. So I contacted people like Stavis Ellis, who was the sergeant that was in charge of the motorcade at the time of the Kennedy assassination. And he was one who had witnessed a hole in the windshield. And he was just a remarkable man. Stavis Ellis was not a person that you could persuade to your point of view, which is something that I respect highly. He is not somebody that sought out celebrity. He described that he was looking at the windshield, and he said he noticed he and H.R. Freeman, who was another Dallas police officer, were looking at the windshield, and he saw that there was a hole in the windshield. And he just kind of blurted out, "There's a hole in the windshield." And a Secret Service agent came up to him and said, "That's not a hole, that's a fragment." And Ellis said, "That's not a damn fragment, it's a hole." It was unequivocal. He recalled seeing the hole a little bit lower in the windshield. And people have pounced on that. They said, well, people have seen the hole in different, a little bit different places. The nature of eyewitness testimony is that if you do not have differences, then you're going to have to be skeptical of the testimony. What people were very clear about is that they saw a hole, that they very clearly saw a hole, and it was one hole. And if people are all describing one hole and one windshield, to me it's obvious that they are all looking at the same thing. If there's a hole, and if that hole emanates from the front, as George Whitaker described it, then that shows that there was a shot from the front, and the idea of a lone assassin is entirely dismissed. It's no longer credible. And not only does it do that, it deeply implicates the government. What happened to that windshield? And George Whitaker gave an answer to that. Then you have to ask, who ordered the destruction of that windshield, and why did they do that? There was Dr. Evalia Glanges. She was a second-year medical student at the time. As I had an opportunity to talk with her, I believe it was in January 1999, she was retiring at age 59. It said because she was retiring that she was going to be willing to talk to me. And we had a wonderful conversation. And unfortunately, just a few weeks after that, she passed away at age 59. Very unexpected. Very unexpected. But she told her story, and the story was that she was leaning on the vehicle, and she saw a hole in the windshield. She knew guns. She knew what a bullet looked like going through a windshield, and she described that as a bullet going through that windshield. Another thing they note in here, they talk about Secret Service agent Charles Taylor Jr. He was an eyewitness. The church committee first talked, apparently, to Mr. Taylor in 1975. What they don't tell you is that for some reason, this first conversation was labeled top secret. In 1975, in this top secret memorandum, he says that he definitely saw a hole in the windshield. When the Kennedy limousine was flown back from Dallas to Washington, D.C., Charles Taylor Jr. was the passenger in the limousine when it went from the airport, Andrews Air Force Base, to the White House garage. And unless he was sitting there, then he had the entire opportunity during that trip to look at that windshield, and he could see that there was a hole. I have found this document. It is labeled top secret. It was released on 9/13/2000. It says the staff interviewed Secret Service Agent Taylor on December 10th, 1975. On that occasion, Taylor was positive that there had been a hole through the windshield. It's unequivocal. I definitely saw a hole, and he did definitely describe what he saw in that windshield. But what the FBI did is they wrote, no holes were found. Now, I've seen police reports for 31 years that I've been involved as a prosecutor, law enforcement, as an attorney. You do not write down things that you don't find. You write down things that you do find. Another person, two people from the St. Louis Dispatch were there at that time also and saw holes in the windshield, and I mentioned their names earlier. One was Richard Dudman, and the other was Frank Cormier. And Richard Dudman actually wrote an article about the windshield, and he said that in that article that he had seen a hole, but he was unable to tell from which direction the hole had come from because he could not see the cup in the windshield itself that would indicate whether it had come from the front towards the back or from the inside towards the outside. The government was immediately going after Richard Dudman after he published his article. And a little fact that people don't know is that Richard Dudman was actually flown to Washington, D.C. by the government in order to get him to recant his testimony that he had seen a hole in the windshield. Richard Dudman, from that point on, was petrified. I am one of the few people that, if not the only one, that really has talked to Richard Dudman, and I spoke with him in 1999. He would not talk about the windshield at all. He was clearly somebody who was still very fearful, even though he was in his 80s, but he would not talk about it. He was clearly a man in fear. And what people don't recognize is how fearful some of these witnesses are. The first time I ever spoke to Stavus Ellis, when he found out that I was an attorney, when he found out that I was going to talk to him about the hole in the windshield, he said to me, "I cannot talk to you. I do not want a bullet in my head." These people were legitimately fearful. But actually, let me add one other thing, though. James Chaney was interviewed on November 22nd, 1963. And James Chaney and Stavus Ellis both saw the first shot hit the dirt across from the Texas Book Depository. They saw dirt fly up. And both of them told the Warren Commission investigators about that, and they were told by the investigators that they could not have seen that. And then James Chaney said that the second shot, and it's on record, it's on tape, the second shot hit Kennedy in the face, which means he was hit from the front. It was a very easy shot. It was less than 100 yards. It's been demonstrated that a shot can be fired to a windshield accurately, and what a sniper would have been done probably would have been to aim at his chest, and that's probably what was done. Many people don't realize is that the limousine belonged to the Ford Motor Company. They were leasing it to the federal government at a cost of $500 per year. There's only one person that could have overseen that, ordered that limousine to go to the Ford Motor Company, and that would have been Lyndon Johnson. And I think that this is the start of the cover-up. The House Select Committee said that there is testimony. Ferguson drove the limousine to Detroit on December 20th, 1963. Well, I told you that the car was there on November 25th and probably was flown in on the night of the 24th. But this is an absolute falsehood. First of all, let's look at the realities of him driving that car from Washington, D.C. to Detroit. The distance from Washington, D.C. to Detroit is 520 miles. I happened to go look up the weather reports for that period of time, December 20th. The weather was atrocious, especially through Pennsylvania and such, and even in Michigan. There was a lot of snow. The roads were bad. Can you imagine him driving this bloody limousine and stopping to fill up for gas? And again, by December 20th, this is the most recognizable car in the world. This midnight blue, long stretch limousine. Can you imagine him driving by people on the highway and having some child in the back saying, "Look, Mom," or "Look, Dad, there's the car Kennedy was killed in," as it drives past? What happened if it would have had a breakdown or whatever? And why do I also know this was a lie? And the House Select Committee noticed that there were discrepancies. The official records of Hess and Eisenhart, and I communicated with Willard Hess, even going to his home, taped interviews, letters, correspondence, his own personal notes from that time, even when he went to the Pentagon on December 11th, 1963, to talk about things. The official records of Hess and Eisenhart, and this is noted by the House Select Committee, says that the limousine arrived at his plant on December 13th, 1963. I talked to a number of employees that worked on that limousine, and I have taped interviews with them from the Hess and Eisenhart Company. They felt just tremendous remorse. Some of them just cried when they found out that Kennedy had been killed in the limousine that they had so painstakingly worked on. It was just that the tragedy was not only the president's death, but the tragedy was that that death occurred in the vehicle that they had put their blood, sweat, and tears in building to the specifications that would befit the President of the United States. All of them said that that vehicle arrived well before Christmas. So why was this memo created? Why was F. Von Ferguson lying? And again, I think it was to create a deception, to create a conflict in the testimony, just like the conflict existed. I don't think Charles Taylor's report was meant to come out. I think it just slipped by all the paperwork that was going by at that time, and the FBI report was supposed to stand as the legitimate report of what happened that day. But you cannot, there's no such thing as a perfect crime. And one of the people that was most helpful to me that's also now deceased is a guy named John Ritson. And unfortunately, felt he was getting very close to some things in the assassination, and he felt he was getting in some dangerous territory. And I talked to him 2 nights. He had been run off the road, a truck with its windows blackened, and was in the hospital and had gotten out. And he had called me. He was going to come and visit me. And he said he had gotten some important information that he was kind of fearful about, something about a black bag or something. But 2 days later, he died. Every night he was going to bed and he was putting like an oxygen mask on himself. For some reason, they said that he forgot to do that night. I can understand why Dudman was still in fear when I tried to talk to him. I understand why Charles Taylor Jr. would have changed his mind. You know, it would be very easy to be, you know that you're stepping into grounds that can be very, very dangerous. Many of these people did not realize how highly significant or how their stories and accounts fit together with other people's until I talked to them. It was only after I got their accounts that I would tell them about these other people. And then they realized that what they did see was very significant. Some of these people did not even realize that the windshield that is in the National Archives does not have a hole in it. I mean, they just assumed that, you know, the windshield they saw on November 22nd was the windshield that was still around. They didn't know there was any issue about it at all. but just fascinating people. But every single person, before I could vouch for them, I had to have some kind of corroboration. I believe Lyndon Johnson knew what was going to happen. I sincerely believe that all of the evidence points that Johnson knew what was happening, the actual celebration that was going on in the White House.